Hi there, welcome to the video, and if you're a returning viewer, hello again. You're watching the Crash Review of Books, and I'm Kerry. Today, a review of a biography of sorts about a important figure in the history of music, perhaps, one you may or may not have heard of, and that is a gentleman who became known as Joe Meek. Now, this is a book by Darryl W Bullock, the late Darryl W Bullock, who died in late 2024, and this was his final book, and it is entitled Love and Fury, The Extraordinary Life, Death and Legacy of Joe Meek. For some reason the full title is in tiny print on the cover, and just the name Joe Meek is in bold, which is probably tells you something about the selling power that Meek has these days. About 60 odd years past his death, he's had a bit of a renaissance in popular culture. So anyway, who was him? Now, born Robert George Meek in 1929, he was a quiet, inquisitive boy who loved tinkering with stuff, and he would record sounds on an old reel-to-reel tape recorder, and that became basically his life. This book kind of speeds past his early life, so we basically learn about his family, and then he goes into the RAF after World War II as a national service training. You know, everyone had to do their national service. He was drafted into that. He became a radar and electronics technician. In the late 50s, he decided to go into the world of music. We follow him through his early career, working for, I think, Radio Luxembourg, where he produced radio shows about new music. And then he worked for a number of recording studios, and before setting up his own company, RGM, in, I think, 1959 or 1960. A lot of this is quite quickly glossed over in the book, because there's obviously the meat of the story is the 6 or 7 years when he was ensconced at his own studio at 304 Holloway Road, and that's where all the magic took place. Now, Meek is often credited as one of the first producers that used a recording studio as another instrument, another part of the musical process, and that is pretty much his legacy. It is widespread these days that all the technical doodads can be just about as important as what the musicians do, and Meek was a pioneer in that. So 304 Holloway Road in London was very flat, which he hired, rented above a shop, I think a leather goods shop, and more than just live there, he basically turned it into his office and his recording studio. There were several levels to the flat, and you could go upstairs to a bathroom, and that was used for recording echoes and all sorts of things. And he had his own office and a control room, and it was all on split levels, so he had to go up and down to communicate with the artists at the time. Now, there was a steady stream. Meek started to get a name for himself, and there was a steady stream of people wanting to audition, and he would accept many of them and listen to what how they performed, and sometimes he'd sign them up for contracts, and sometimes he'd tell them to go away. And he was a mercurial character. This book really delves into his very odd nature. He was fascinated by science, technology, and much like myself, space flight and science fiction. He also had an interest in the occult. He was into seances and ghosts and stories, and this is all kind of a mix into his personality, which kind of led to later events. Now, like I said, the bulk of this book is like the 6 to 7 years of his career at 304 Holloway Road, where he reached some incredible highs and ended up in some incredible low places. So kind of a lot of this book is probably of niche interest only. It is history of music, and really UK music in the early 60s to late 60s. So it's like a laundry list of, say, January the 5th, this band came in and recorded this song, and this band was consisted of these people at this time, and this person went on to this other band and became famous, and this other person went on and became a school teacher, that type of thing. There's a lot of that in this book. My eyes did start to blur over after a while of all that type of thing, but the author drops in a lot of tidbits and contextual information, which makes it more interesting perhaps. What was the music scene at the time, what were people interested in, what was going on in current events, that type of thing. Now Meek himself was an interesting character, like I've already said. He was mercurial, he had moods and tempers. One day he would be kind and generous and give writing credits to people as like a little bonus, or he would lend people money, or he would push somebody's career to success, but other times he'd be angry and grumpy, and this kind of got worse and worse over time. And there's lots of speculation. People state it as fact that he had mental illness, that he was never diagnosed with anything. I think he was probably afraid to go that far. But he did show the signs of perhaps borderline schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, as we call it today. He had massive highs, massive lows, and he didn't help because he got into taking amphetamines and all that type of stuff to basically help himself along. Now, he had some tremendous successes. Like I said, he kind of used the studio as an instrument type thing, and he would record. His fascinating recording sounds was all-consuming. If he felt he had like a picture of how a song should be in his mind, a soundscape, and he did everything in his his powers to record that soundscape, even if they include like getting a glass and jingling a chain in it or something, and recording that sound, because he had that certain thing in his head and he wanted it to be reproduced on the record. The other aspect of his personality, or his life, which shouldn't be ignored, is that he was a gay man in a time where that was still not acceptable to the authorities and public at large. This caused him a lot of stress. He was in some serious relationships with other men at the time, some of who lived with him at the flat, or others that kind of fell out with him and moved away. But he didn't seem to be satisfied with a stable relationship. He sought like quick thrills, which led him to a lot of trouble. A lot of the artists that came to record and audition with him, he'd sometimes make passes at the young men, which caused a lot of concern and made people very uncomfortable, and other people laughed it off as just Joe being Joe, but it was a worry for many of the people at that time. And the other thing he did, he went looking for cheap thrills in the area of cottaging. If you know what that is, it's where gay men would go and meet at a certain location, usually a public toilet, and get some type of cheap thrill there. This led perhaps to his downfall, because he was entrapped by an undercover officer at one of these meetings, which led him to being arrested, and people knowing about his proclivities basically, and that was his biggest fear. He didn't want people to know he was gay, even though it was pretty damn obvious. And that kind of led to his downfall. But on the way, he had some amazing successes. Now, in 1962, the communication satellite Telstar 1 was launched by the United States. And in, I think, July 1962, there was like a worldwide television link-up, because the Telstar was a new thing. We could have contact all around the world via communication satellite, something that the sci-fi author Arthur C. Clarke is credited as inventing, basically a relay in space, or a big antenna in space. You could send a signal from one country and it would be received in the others. That was a groundbreaking thing at the time, and Telstar in July 1962 was used for a worldwide television broadcast, which brought in acts and people and dignitaries from each side of the Atlantic and around the world onto the screens live together. And this was a mind-bending thing for people at the time, and Meek, being an enthusiast for space and technology and all sorts of things, thought this was, like an epoch-making event in the world, and he celebrated it by creating the hit single Telstar, which was performed by his in-house band, maybe at the studio at the time, the Tornadoes. Telstar has basically gone on to be evocative of the era, the 60s, the Brave New World of space exploration and technology at the time is used to evoke that period in documentaries and dramas to this day. It's a great track. For many years I thought the start of it was a car revving up, but it seems, based on this book, it's actually the sound of a guitar pedal amplifier thing being plugged in. Telstar, you probably know it, even if you don't recognise it from what I'm saying. You will know this tune if you've been around for a while. I will put a link to it in the video. So Telstar became a worldwide hit, massive hit. People couldn't get enough. They tried to recreate the experience by other instrumentals, which failed miserably. And Telstar's, the royalties, the money that Meek made from it was tied up in legal actions until probably after his death. He didn't see a lot of money from Telstar, which is another thing that drove him down mood-wise. He had a couple of other hits. The biggest one after that was in 1964, a song called Have I the Right, performed by the band The Honeycombs, which was unique at the time as having a female drummer. Honey Landry was her name. Have I the Right was basically a coded gay song. If you listen to the lyrics, it's someone asking, is this acceptable? And Have I the Right is a massive stomping tune, driving rhythm. It's a really good song. I really enjoyed it. I kind of rediscovered it after reading it in this book. I didn't realise there was a connection to Meek, and he created the stomping sounds by actually recording people stomping up and down some stairs to the annoyance of his landlady. So Have I the Right was written by a couple of guys called Howard and Blakely, I believe, and likewise there was all sorts of legal skirmishes about whether this was an original tune or they'd copied off someone, which tied up the money for that song as well. I will link to there's like a restored 4K video of it on YouTube, and it is a great tune. I really like it. I'm not sure what message it's giving at the end, but it's a great driving beat, like I said. Now, as the 60s went on, and there was this ever-ending stream of people coming to Holloway Road, thinking they could make their fame and fortune. There were people that went on to bigger and greater things. The members of Led Zeppelin, who would go on to bigger things in the following decade, and even the young David Bowie ended up there with one of his early bands. But Meek kind of missed the boat on music. He kind of dismissed the rise of the Beatles and the beat sound from Liverpool, dismissed it all, and he was kind of having to play catch up with the musical trends, and he thought he knew what teenagers wanted, but his vision was kind of out of date, and he never kind of caught up to the growing trends. He had a few more minor hits, but he was kind of like stuck in the early 60s really, and that didn't help. He faced a number of financial issues. He became increasingly paranoid. He thought other record producers were stealing his ideas. He thought he was bugged. In the end, he kind of like barricaded himself into 304 Holloway Road, argued with everyone, threw people out. He was in a kind of a downward spiral, and no one seemed to be able to help him. The mental illness thing obviously came into it at some extent, as did the drugs. He was in a very bad state, and in February 1967, his landlady from downstairs in the leather goods shop heard that he was arguing with people, and she had apparently a good relationship with him, and she went up to talk to him. They got into an argument. As she was walking down the stairs away from him, Meek used a shotgun that was owned by one of his artists and alleged lover, Heinz Burt, to shoot his landlady in the back at close range. And then apparently, distraught by what he had done, he used the shotgun to shoot his own head off, and this murder-suicide became the big scandal of the day, and it is pretty much one of the only things that people know about Joe Meek since that time. This kind of messy ending to his career. Like I said, he was in a downward spiral, and of course there were all sorts of conspiracy theories about the event that ended his life. People thought he was involved with gangland, the Cray brothers, all sorts of things. People had various anecdotes questioning the official narrative. Some witnesses had accounts that didn't quite match with the official view. There was an inquest and all that type of thing. Now, in the end, his studio was broken up. The equipment was sometimes like cables cut and thrown away, and various pieces of gear were chucked out, and others were sold and auctioned off. One of the disappointing things about this book is it doesn't really go in. It made a great point that Meek made a lot of his own gear and equipment and modified stuff. It doesn't really detail that. Maybe that's not what Bullock was interested in, but as a nerdy tech guy myself, I would have liked to know the details. And also, when his studio was packed up, hundreds of tapes, reel-to-reel tapes that he used of all his recordings were boxed up in plywood boxes known as tea chests. And these were kept in storage by various people for about 40 years, 40, 50 years. There were attempts to collate them and catalogue them, but this is what usually went bad. And eventually they were sold in 2008. And since then, people have gone to great efforts to restore them and use the recordings of them. And I think Cherry Red Records, I think the company was, ended up buying them for £200,000 in 2008. And in the last 10 years, I've been putting out albums based on the material, so you can get a whole album about all the outtakes and tunes that lead up to Telstar and so on, and the various themed albums like that of the various artists that he was involved with, the girl groups, the early versions of well-known bands and that type of thing. So this material is coming out, and it's famously known as the Tea Chest tapes. There are rumours that there's stuff to come from artists like I mentioned earlier, like David Bowie, which has never been heard before, but a lot of that material is still forthcoming. Anyway, it's an enjoyable book, but like I said, it's a bit niche. The laundry list type thing of what artist was recording what on what day and who was in which band at what time and who switched to other bands and all that type of thing, that can get a bit tedious. But for me, it was interesting to know the details about Meek's life, because his reputation is like being rediscovered over the last decade or so, and there's been movies and TV shows and documentaries about him. I think for a long time he was dismissed as some type of monster or creep or something, and his musical legacy was pretty much ignored. People kind of like cruised on his reputation and his discoveries and inventions in the studio. But he's being reassessed by popular culture these days anyway. And I only knew the very basics of the story. I knew, Telstar was something I came across in my basically love of space flight and technology, and it was something that even when I was a child was still on the radio. And I really wanted to know the story behind it, and this book kind of filled me in. So it's an interesting book, maybe not for everyone. Maybe you won't like the endless minutiae of music industry details. Maybe you don't want to know about the gay side of stuff, but as part of our culture, shared culture, music, it's an interesting story which probably deserves to be known, just to show how one man can make a difference and also be driven to extremes by his success or lack thereof. So that is Love and Fury by Darryl W Bullock. Interesting biography. If you're interested in the music industry or history of the 1960s, it's very interesting, and I enjoyed reading it. It did become a little chore in the middle section with all the minutiae, like I said, but in the end it was a fascinating read and kind of opened up a world which I was not very au fait about. So that is the book for today. Thank you. We'll catch you next time.